Okay. Hi, guys. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you tonight. I've got Steve and Bill with me, and we're going to talk about some aspects of purity culture and their experiences as men growing up in the two by two church. And then we're going to talk some about emotional health and relational health and how purity culture affects our relationships. So I'm looking forward to this. Maybe I'll go to you first, Bill, if you want to introduce yourself, kind of your background in the church and who you are.
Sure. Thank you. So Bill Schueler, I was born and raised in the two by two church. And I guess for my side of the family, I would say I'm second generation. My parents joined probably, I think, in the 70s. They came from the Catholic Church. And then I left, actually, my wife and my whole family left in August of 2023. Of course, after Brewgate and after looking at, of course, not only how the abuse was being handled, but also looking at doctrinal issues as well. So I was an elder before we left. I was an elder for about 2.5 years, a meeting in our home. And it's very interesting to kind of think back to that period of like after Brewergate and looking at doctrine and then looking at how like meeting was run in our home. And I had ideas of maybe how to change it. But then I would play this mind game. It's like, well, okay, if I do this, then certain people in my meeting will not agree with it and they'll go to the workers and then I'll get a talking to by the workers and then the meeting's going to be removed from my home. So why even bother? So that's kind of how it went. And, eventually my wife and we tried a different church and we did not burst into flames. And that was kind of the catalyst to say, you know what, we need to go, we have to make a decision, we need to go. And so we left kind of right before conventions in 2023. So that's my story so far.
Cool. Thanks, Bill. Steve.
I'm Steve VanDermyden, and I was born and raised also a fourth generation on one side and either third or fourth on the other side. It's hard to remember where, but it goes back there a ways. I left in 2002, so what's that, 24 years ago. It coincided with my divorce, but I kind of was watching. I didn't know what I was looking at in particular that it was bothering me. But in looking back, what was bothering me was a lot of the purity culture and the differences between how women and men had to be and act. And I was raising four daughters at the time and just realizing, and I also have to acknowledge I wasn't a particularly religious person even while I was attending meeting. So I'm looking at how my daughters are having to be raised and how unfair it felt. And that was just kind of the beginning of my questioning things. So when we ended up getting divorced, it was just an easy time for me to completely leave the church. And a few years later, I tried looking at a couple of religions, a couple of churches, but realized that just wasn't a path that made sense for myself.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I would like to ask each of you, just as we're getting started, we've kind of texted and had some conversations prior to this. And I know that both of you have started, you've become more self-aware, you've started educating yourself, you've started learning about purity culture, you've been working on your relationships and your emotional health. So I'm curious for you each individually, like what was the instigator, the motivator for that process or that journey that you started down? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
For me, while I was looking at leaving and probably all the way through my 30s before I left, there was a distinct feeling, and this is more on the emotional side than the religious side, of not being a whole person. There was just something missing for me. And I didn't know what that was until after I left and started bumping up against the fact that there was not an emotional language for me. I was raised with parents that really had no emotional language. I was raised in a family that was happy until they exploded. There
Hmm.
was no in between. And you find this is pretty common in purity culture. Not everybody has that, but that's a lot of our experiences. And I think I was one that had a lot of emotions and I
Hmm.
knew it, but I didn't know how to express them or how to get from here to there. And that was kind of the beginning of my journey, is just trying to find my own ability to express my own emotions and to be able to have a better relationship going forward after my divorce as well.
Yeah, that's great. You professionally now work in this field. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I've started coaching in relationship and communication after, 10, 15 years of working on my own. It kind of became a passion of mine. I've done it a lot for friends, family, just working with them on how to improve relationship, how to create better communication for themselves and for couples. And out of that, I've finally in the last couple of years just started doing as a business, and it's been very rewarding. I love helping people learn to create more stable, thriving, strong communicative relationships.
That's great. How about you, Bill? What has the journey been like for you?
Well, I'll just put it up front. I'm still a work in progress. I know I have a lot to do. Um, but I like you asked this question, prior to us getting together, and it's like, man, how far back do I go? I just look at how I was raised and kind of the culture of our home and what happened in our home, what was modeled for me. I know now that was not healthy. Now it's hard to parse out like what was family dynamics, what is part of the religion. There's probably amalgam of both.
Hmm.
But I think where I really started to look at myself emotionally was probably in 2020. Um, my father had cancer and decided to go on to hospice, and this was in like June, so like
Okay.
things are closed down.
Oh, right.
You're lucky to like get a flight, but even then the flights were empty essentially. But went back home and went back into that dynamic, that family dynamic, and then realized how dysfunctional it was. It's like, I left Wisconsin in 2005, and it was 2020. It's 15 years later. It's like I never left.
Mm.
The dysfunction was still there. And as an adult, being away for 15 years, being an adult, it hits you differently,
Yeah.
hits you harder, where it's like, this is not acceptable. What's happening here is not acceptable. So it was interesting. So I came home here and I was just chatting with an aunt of on my wife's side, and she's like, you might want to look into this. There might be some narcissism in there. I'm like, what? Really? So then I look into it, and then you look at all the patterns. It's like, holy moly. But then I also like, you look into that, you're like, man, I also learned some of those behaviors. And I see how that affects my relationships.
Yeah.
And I actually got pretty scared because I'm like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to do that. So I sought out a therapist for briefly, and there's some comforting words that she said to me. She's like, just the fact that you are aware and becoming aware
Mm.
is a good thing. And so that happened. And then, of course, going through leaving the 2x2s in 2023, it's all been a period of like self-discovery. Like I still don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. I don't know who I am in some aspects. Like, who am I really?
Yeah.
Do I really want to do this? Like, I'm a nurse. I work in a female dominated field. I care for people. And I look up how I was raised. Did that kind of push me over into that field to,
Mhm.
one where you're a people pleaser,
Yeah.
essentially. And, I've let people walk all over me for, a good portion of my life. And, healthcare is, I don't know if you've been anywhere near healthcare as of late.
Yeah.
It's a pretty abusive field if you work in it. But anyway, it's weird. It's definitely still a huge work in progress. Um, and I know it takes work on my end, but I know I won't be done anytime soon.
Yeah.
So
I hear you, Bill. I'm in a similar spot. We left the church at a similar time, and yeah, it's just been some days it feels overwhelming. Actually, I don't know if you remember these days, Steve, if it was like this for you at all, but I just feel like I'm playing catch up so much with a lot of these skills that I'm
Yeah.
realizing I don't have. And it's hard sometimes because I'm 42 and I'm like, I should know this stuff already, and I don't. So
No, that's
yeah,
very true. I remember those days too. And I mean, I've been out 24 years. There's still things you're learning and working through.
yeah. And that's the beauty, right? Like we're never going to arrive at being a perfect human, and now we can be okay with that too, which I think feels
Yeah.
so much
Over
better.
time, we just become a little bit less imperfect.
I like that. It's a good way to put it. Thank you guys for sharing that. I think it'd be great to start with just talking about, growing up and what it was like for us. I especially want to get you guys' opinions about what it was like for you growing up as boys in the church and in your families. So if one of you might want to start with like how affection or physical touch or sex was modeled or talked about to you in your families of origin.
Mine was pretty empty of all of
Okay.
that. I mean, empty is the best. I've thought about this question. It's the best word I can come up with. It just didn't exist.
Mm.
My parents weren't affectionate with really us or each other, which bleeds over into you don't see any talk or any sexuality. I mean, from the parents, no affection. It was empty was the best word I could come up with,
Yeah.
which is part of what led me to realizing there was a lot missing for me later on,
Mhm.
because as I'm raising kids, I don't know any different. And the word narcissism came up for my family growing up late as I was going through my own therapy years ago, and you start seeing it. So yeah, there was more just not any modeling for me, and I see that in other people come out of purity culture. Some, but yet there were some that had great model families. That isn't exclusive, but I think purity culture really kind of fosters that kind of dynamic.
Mm.
It's where men aren't allowed to or taught to be emotional at all, even more than standard society.
Yeah.
I
And then
would, I
and
would,
sex isn't talked about in general, right? So it's something that's kept quiet.
Yeah. Yeah, my family, it wasn't put down or negated. It just wasn't talked about at all. It
Hmm.
just didn't exist.
Yeah.
yeah, I think, I echo some of what Steve said. I try to go back in my memory and like, were my parents super affectionate to each other? And it's like, well, then what does that mean? What indicates affection? Did I see them hug? Did I see them kiss? Not a lot, I would say. Like we really did, like the only things I remember about talking about sex was um so there's five of us kids. I'm the youngest. It goes boy, three girls, and then a boy. So essentially I was raised with three sisters, for most of the kids being home. But I remember mom talking to one of my sisters about going on a date and then being careful because something can happen in the heat of the moment, quote unquote. And really, for me, no discussion with me. I remember when we in like middle school when we had the sex ed class,
Yeah.
mom showed up for that, which was awkward.
Oh, like at your school? Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, they encouraged the
That's not
parents to come
awkward at
and
all.
not awkward at all. I mean, I think they encouraged the parents to come, be present, especially with you're starting to talk about this, weird thing. I cannot put that my parents ever modeled anything healthy sexually. Like I go back in my memory, I'm like, did I even like accidentally walk in on my parents? No.
Hmm.
Um, Never really saw anything sexual. There's just one incident where um one shamed the other, verbally in front of
Mm.
people, in front of us, or at least I heard it, for getting, I don't know, a little bit of foreplay. But that's it.
Mm.
Um, I
So,
probably
yeah.
learned, yeah, probably learned more from maybe other kids, learn more from school
Yeah.
about what it means to be, sexually healthy, and what, hey, you're going through these changes. This is what's going to happen. Or it's regulated to a book. That's what I
Okay.
think. I had the book and it sat on my shelf and I would refer to it, here and there. But, you know, that's, or maybe a parent's
Yeah.
like, hey, here's the book. You have any
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah. So for both of you, it sounds like it was really not talked about, kind of like not there. So
Mhm.
I'm curious, kind of what messages then you internalized or picked up about sexuality, about sex as kids, if you can remember, or like what feelings you had about it.
Yeah, I don't really remember picking up much until I was older.
Okay.
And I think then more it becomes school conversations at school, workplace when you're young. It's more like by social osmosis than
Hmm.
any particular learning at all.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. It's more out of osmosis and what your peers maybe say. I will say, like, maybe I got a little bit more braver when I was in college about like seeking out information. I think I came across there was a 2x2 discussion board, and I was, I forget who I was chatting with, but I think it was a lady out of California, and she was talking to me about what happens at convention and people trying to hook up during convention. I'm like, what? This happens? Really? This actually happens? And then I think within a couple years had a peer, tell me of their own kind of escapades. I'm like, really? This is really happening? I think I was shielded from a lot of things as a kid and even as a young adult. You're like, really? People do this?
Yeah.
People do this while they're in meetings?
Yeah.
I had that same kind of experience. I was a shy kid, and then you hear about it later, and you're like, that was going on.
Yeah, that was going on.
There's a lot more going on there.
I've
Yeah.
had that experience just in the last like year or two, learning about what was going on. I was very naive, sheltered. I don't know.
Yeah. And my older brother was in the work for 19 years, and the
Okay.
stories he would tell me, and he was a very naive person. He says, I didn't know any of that was going on. And yeah, he had a lot of stories about
Yeah.
preps.
Yeah. It's so interesting that like these stories were being passed, but it was all like hush hush, like there was no out in the open conversations around what was happening or what that meant or
Yeah. It was
yeah.
all underground and illicit.
Yeah. Did you as boys or men like we talked a lot about women about the messages we got about our bodies, and I think one big one that we got was that our bodies were dangerous. Were there any like messages that you picked up about your body growing up, or was it again kind of like an absence of,
Again, I would just say absolute
yeah.
absence. It's the body shaming, the body tends to not be as much of a thing for men. I think
Mm-hmm.
more what we got was learn to be stoic and unfeeling, man
Mm-hmm.
up, be tough, suck it up. That was one of the messages we got is don't be emotional, don't have feelings, just
Yeah.
suck it up. Nothing about that I remember about body.
About body. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember anything like overtly talked about as far as bodies. I'm trying to think of like if I heard anything in meeting, or I mean, you heard about like being pure. I remember once at convention they had like, well, we're going to have a meeting for just young folks. Okay, parents can kind of hang out in the back. Most of them shouldn't be in here, but they talked about, I think, pregnancy. I think they even like, well, people are going to like hockey games and they're wearing jeans. And uh,
Women, I'm assuming. Yeah.
yes, of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
but nothing like really directed towards the behavior of boys or men.
Hmm.
Um, but and of course, it's a male worker,
Yeah.
having this meeting, of course.
And it's
Um,
and it's purity culture.
Right. Purity culture at its finest. I mean, if I look at my own sexuality, I did my own self-discovery. I mean, I remember in high school looking, reading some books on like what's normal behavior, sexual discovery behavior versus,
Hmm.
essentially what is normal.
Yeah. That's
Oh,
an
and
important point because when you don't have information, you don't know what's normal. And I think kids tend to pathologize or think something's wrong with them in the absence of actual information.
that is exactly true for me because we're going to talk about masturbation here.
Yeah, that's fine.
That was a self-discovery for me. I don't know what age, probably grade school, middle school. It felt good. And then I think I admitted to one of my best friends when I was in college. And I admitted to it with a huge ton of guilt.
Mm.
And he said, Bill, so do I. It's normal. I had
Yeah.
never had this conversation with anybody until I was in college.
Hmm.
I was actually caught like 2 times when I was a kid,
Hmm.
and it was loudly proclaimed through the house
Oh,
because I could hear it through the walls. So there was
then there's the
direct
shame.
shame in that, and that feeling it didn't go away for a long, long time.
Yep.
So I guess that's the messaging. Yes, you are,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know if it's, my Catholic upbringing for my parents, some of
Oh,
that,
okay.
or just not
Mhm.
knowing, like, well, what is masturbation? How does it fit
Yeah.
in? How does it fit in within a religious culture? How does it fit in within Christianity? Does the Bible say really anything about masturbation? It kind of really doesn't.
Right.
It talks
And
about
just like
sexual
normal,
immorality.
I think like normal, like understanding normal childhood development as well, right? Like there's
Right.
so many resources now that as parents we can go to and be like, oh, this is a normal thing that kids start experimenting with when they're very, very young, and
Mhm.
talking to them
Yeah.
about that from a very young age. So, and that I don't know if those resources didn't exist or parents weren't equipped to have those conversations.
They did not exist even when I was raising kids.
Yeah.
I know my kids have way more resources for their
Yeah.
kids. And my discovery was, pretty much the same as Bill. It's you as a young boy, puberty, it just kind of comes natural and you learn it. I was lucky enough to never be caught or shamed by it. So there wasn't, and I didn't have a Catholic background. So that might have made it a little more easier for me in that way. So there was never any conversations, but it was just purely self-discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one interesting thing I'll just say, like, from having come from that to like where I'm at now, it's interesting. My wife and I attended a conference. It's you might have heard of it as like the Weekend to Remember. It's a Christian-based
Okay.
conference. The husband and wife are supposed to go, but there was, and this was while we were still
Mm.
in meetings, going to meetings, and there was a book set there about like how to talk to your kids about sex. And I mean, it's sitting over here on my shelf. And I was like, we are pretty brave to buy that book
Mm.
set while we're still going to meetings. And it sat on the shelf. Actually, I turned them backwards so that my children could not read the title. Okay. This is how
Yeah.
it affects your brain. Now they're sitting out in the open and
Hmm.
I've paged through them, but you know, my eldest is 13 and it's like we have to talk to him about this. We have to tell him what's happening with his body, and because he's been through some things that have made him very uncomfortable, and trying to tell him like this is normal, what you're feeling
Hmm.
is normal, what you're experiencing is normal. We want you to come and talk to us about it. And me being in healthcare, it's like I could educate till the cows come home about certain things. My wife is still pretty uncomfortable about talking about sex sometimes to our kids, but I'm like, yeah, just send them to me. I'm happy to have the conversation and try not to make it awkward. Try to make them feel comfortable with it. But it's interesting, even since leaving meeting, that has flipped quite a bit, where it's like it's not so taboo. I don't want it to be how it was with me
Yeah.
as a kid.
Right.
So I have to own up as a parent. I have to kind of get some gumption, get over my
Yeah.
uncomfortableness, and actually educate my children on what to expect
Yeah.
and what healthy sexual life looks like, or can look like anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great thing to remember. I remember it often too. Like, if we don't want our kids to be awkward about it, we kind of have to take on that awkwardness and that discomfort and be the ones to start to break that cycle. And yeah, it is awkward and feels a little weird because we never had anyone model it or talk about it in a way that was normal with us.
It's very true. And one of the best ways to get comfortable with that as a couple is learn
Yeah.
to talk about it between each other.
Okay, this is great, Steve. This was one of our questions, so let's just jump into it.
Okay.
Yeah, how do we, Bill and I are newer to this than you are. We're just coming out of purity culture, starting these conversations with our spouses and our kids. Like, how do we get comfortable talking about this stuff?
Really goes back to communication. That's the one thing we weren't taught in purity culture. You're really taught not how to think, you're taught what to think. This is your belief. This is what you do. This is what you think. So now all of a sudden we're out here with there's no rules, there's no
Mm-hmm.
guardrails. And it's like, what do we do? But when you learn to communicate between the two of you about your own sexuality, it makes it easier to talk to your kids about sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
But there again, that conversation is hard to start. It's very difficult to go from never talking about it and awkward feelings, and people can be married 20, 30, 40 years and still really be awkward around the subject.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's around just the conversation. How do you talk about sex and sexuality as a couple even? And it can start with little things. Sometimes, some person may be in the mood, some of them may not be. Tends to be one of the most awkward times in every couple's life. It just happens. The thing to do is sit down and talk about the fact that you have those awkward moments someday away from the situation. Sit down
Mm.
some morning with a cup of coffee and let's talk about how we handle this situation when there's desire and there's not desire, and we end up being awkward about it. Some people come up with like code things they can say to
Mm.
indicate something, but just starting those conversations between yourselves, then it can expand into desires, and some people go into fantasies, or whatever, however far you want to take it. It's starting the conversations between the two of you and getting comfortable with your conversation. It naturally morphs into being able to talk to your
Mm.
kids about it. You're having a hard time talking to kids about it because you're uncomfortable about it in your own relationship.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I can't really add much more to that, except saying like when you start having those conversations and you haven't had those most of your like relationship, it sucks. I mean,
They're
it like
awkward.
they're
Yeah.
awkward, your heart's beating fast,
Hmm.
it's like but it's like,
But you just said right there, Bill, is the conversation to have.
right.
This is really awkward. My heart's beating really fast. We need to talk about it. I don't even know how to talk about it. That's the conversation to have.
Mm.
Is
I
you can
love that.
even have a conversation about the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just
how
as a place
difficult
to
it
start.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
Just
think,
going that far is like, I'm really struggling to talk about this,
yeah,
and I know we need to. Maybe that's all you get out one day and come back to it next week.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love that, Steve. And like the idea that we don't have to figure it all out in that one conversation.
You can't figure it out in 20 years of conversation. It's an ongoing thing because it evolves.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
And get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah,
First,
Agreed.
first
Yeah.
with your spouse, and then you can move that onto your kids.
to your kids.
Yeah. And it gets, from what I've experienced, it gets better.
Hmm.
It'll become part of your normal conversation where it's like,
Mhm.
where it's nothing to kind of go over into the subject. But then, it's like, why was it so uncomfortable before?
Yeah.
Why was it so uncomfortable before? Was it like because of meetings or two by two? That's kind of the part I'm trying to pull out,
Hmm.
a little bit. What was hindering me from doing it before?
I would go back to the fact that we were taught to not communicate, because conversation and communication inherently leads to questions. And what do questions lead to?
Hmm. Doubts.
doubt. So don't question, don't ask, and that really carries over to your relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Steve. Like, I know one thing my husband and I are trying to practice, and it's a new skill for us, is being curious about each other. I'm trying,
Such a great question.
I'll
Yeah,
try. Yeah. I mean, I keep it so far in the last couple of years, like so many things come back to curiosity, how it feels when someone is curious about you, like genuinely
mhm.
curious, what it feels like when you're curious about other people. And I think as I'm sitting with that right now, I think some of the feelings that come up with in me when I am curious about someone, and especially like if it's a conversation with my husband about sexuality, is fear because you don't know what they're going to answer or where that conversation will lead.
Yeah. And that's a subject that the fear of rejection is huge.
Yeah.
And curiosity is really good for your own self too.
Yeah.
When we get charged with emotions, there's a saying that curiosity softens emotions.
Hmm.
But if you think about it, if you're upset, if you start being curious about why you're upset, it softens it. And even being curious about your partner's upset.
Yeah.
So you just like what's happening, what's going on instead of reacting. Curiosity instead of reacting.
Yeah.
Curiosity is super powerful.
Yeah, that's one thing I think since 2020. It's like sitting with what I'm feeling versus like you said, reacting and like, why am I feeling this way? I'm gonna allow myself to feel this way. Um, don't take it out on other people because that's kind of how it was modeled to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, am I 100% on that? No, of course. And like I said, I'm a work in progress. Um, but yeah, just allowing it's like, why do I feel this way? you know where's this coming from? That's like questions um I've learned to ask myself and then not react, because typically if I react, it's not necessarily good, doesn't end up well. I end up not feeling good actually, and then I end up apologizing, which is another thing I've gotten a lot better at too, is apologizing.
Hmm.
Even that's a lot of work to learn how to do. Because
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
that's another thing in purity culture. I don't think men are really taught that that's necessary.
Yes, and I've had to learn that, you know when you have somebody crying in front of you because of what you said, that I think is what has helped me. Like, Bill, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is a point to that. We weren't really told how to apologize. It wasn't truly modeled to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but
Have you ever seen a worker apologize?
no.
It's modeled.
Yeah. Like, yeah, this is a really good topic. Did your parents ever apologize
Not my
for any?
fault.
And on
Hmm.
my side, it's my mother.
Who didn't apologize? Oh, okay.
No, yeah, sorry to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah, who
Yeah.
wouldn't apologize, or the apology would be, I'm sorry, but,
Hmm.
which essentially negates the ownership. There's no ownership. It's
Account.
yes. Yeah, there's no ownership or accountability, and it's everybody else that kind of made them behave that way. And that was modeled to me, and that was that. I know I do that. I mean, I still do that. If you ask my wife, though, she will say, I have changed. She will say, you have changed since going through that whole thing with your father being on hospice and being home for 3 months and being in that environment and then coming home. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. My late wife decided to help me learn how to apologize. And she would make me redo it and redo it and redo it until I got it right.
Wow, Steve.
She was tough
How
and it
did
wasn't
that?
fun, but it
Yeah,
worked.
but
It really helped.
yeah, can you talk a little bit about like how that worked in your relationship and kind of how it shifted things if it did?
It did, and it was kind of unique because we were able to help each other through situations like that, where that's not always normal in a couple. A lot of
Hmm.
times we end up adversarial and needing a third party
Yeah.
to help us, but we were able to step outside of ourselves, and her feelings might be hurt, but she could stop and say, I didn't feel that. I need to hear an apology that I can feel. And
Wow.
I would have to start all over again. And but it was kind of a unique relationship that way where we were able to do that because it
Hmm.
took a lot of grace on her side to do that too.
Yeah, that's true. And to be with it sounded like you guys learned together
Yes, we
how
did.
to be in relationship.
Yeah, a lot of codependency, enmeshment, kind of untangling. It was a lot of work.
Hmm. Yeah. It'd be good to circle back to the codependency and enmeshment, but I would like to hear from you guys how you kind of started working through feeling your emotions and getting in touch with those.
I would go back to the same person. It was a journey. Like I mentioned, I came from a family that really had no emotion, and we were either happy or I call it nuclear mad. It
Hmm.
was it was either you just put up and put up and to put up until you didn't. And that was what was modeled for me. And I remember an instance where something I did irritated her, and that happens a fair amount. And she was just kind of mildly irritated, and I thought that was the end of our relationship because that's how my brain. It's the only way I had to interpret it.
Yeah.
And she was able to stop and say, "Well, I'm just annoyed," and I'm like, "I know it's I couldn't get from A to Z." And there was a whole alphabet in between that I just didn't have. And
Mm.
so we ended up just talking through that and learning to put a feeling on an emotion. Somatic therapy is putting feelings in the body. Where do you feel that? How does that feel? I'm just walking through, what does that emotion feel like to you? What's happening right now? Where are you feeling at? What are you feeling? And it's really learning even to label emotions before you can express them. So it was starting from the very, very basics. And it took years to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
until
And
you
like,
have that foundation, you really can't get deeply into the communication part.
okay. So the emotional piece, because you need the language for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's coming up for me, Steve, when you were talking about going, like, she got annoyed. I'm assuming you met your wife. Yeah. And so you thought it was over. Like, does that come from this black and white thinking that we learn, do you think? Or,
I think partly that combined with the fact that my family had no emotion. It's just that we either were happy or we were just ballistic angry.
oh, okay. So you interpret it as something like very wrong that she was
Yes, yeah,
showing an
it was
emotion.
since she wasn't happy, she was nuclear. There was just no in
Yeah.
between.
Right. That makes sense.
It really puzzled her.
Yeah. So then your reaction would have been confusing to her.
Very,
And
very,
yeah.
yeah. So she got curious. That's really what happened. Is she got curious. What is going on there? And that just started a long conversation about emotions and what is that? What are you feeling? So I had to learn it like a toddler.
Yeah. I feel that. And one thing I've been learning is to let other people's emotions be their emotions.
Yes.
If someone's angry, like to not think that I have to fix it or make them happy or change their emotion, but to just let them have their emotion.
Yeah. We are responsible for what we say and how we say it, but we're not responsible for how it's received.
Right.
I mean, this makes me go not way back, but I look at I think for me, like starting to be in tune emotionally with how I am. It starts with when I met my wife's side of the family. And my family is like, okay, well, I mean, we'll get together here and there. It's not abnormal to not talk to a sibling for even a year. on end. Like some siblings, I haven't had a phone conversation in a couple years. Like we'll text now, after 2020, after my father died, we kind of started a chat group on our phones. We'll do it that way. But when I came to Oregon, and my wife side of the family is very close, to the point where my first like interaction with her family, it was a Christmas, party. And you've got like 30 people and they're all related. They all like each other. And, I'm going into this dynamic where like I'm fine being alone. And it was awkward seeing that and then starting to take part in that family. It was it was awkward because I'm like, I don't this is foreign to me. You guys actually like each other. You get together on Easter and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and you go camping for days on end out in the wilderness where there's no phone, and you still like each other. So it's foreign to me, but yet like I gravitate to that now because it was like the family dynamics are just 180 flip.
Mm-hmm.
And so like my wife did not have the experience I had as a child. She was not in my household. She did not hear what I heard. She did not see what I saw. So I come into the relationship with like, this is how it is, right? This is, I'm modeling what I saw and heard and felt. And, I think we had some sort of argument and I got loud and she thought it was done. She thought we were done. I think we were still dating at the time. She thought we were done. And I'm like, no, your parents never argue? You ever argue with anybody? She's like, no. So the dynamics were totally like they're 180, where it was not uncommon to hear arguments between my parents throughout the entire night, where it wasn't unheard of to hear the same conversations, arguments that went back to when they were married, and these are coming up and these are loud and I'm a kid and I'm trying to sleep and I have to go to school the next day, and remembering like feeling feelings while you're in bed listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
She never experienced that. So, for me, it's like, this is how people act. And she's like, I've never experienced that before. Yeah. So I think, just seeing it like reflected back to you and how your behavior affects somebody and they don't respond like how you're used to people responding to you. That probably was the start. And it didn't help that I was working night shift at that point. That's a whole nother ball of wax. But to have somebody actually give you feedback on how your behavior affects other people was the start. And I think it was the first time that I'm like, wow, that's not good. That's not good behavior on your part. Helped with, self-awareness. And then, I think it slowly got better over the years, but it was 2020 that really was the big catalyst for me to kind of get into my emotions and understand why I do the things I do.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. You both brought up conflict, and I think this is a big area, like conflict and repair, both in knowing how to have the conversations and have the actual conflict, because then you don't repeat the cycles, like you were saying, Bill, and having the same arguments as you were having 20 years ago. So having the ability to bring up that conflict, and then what do you do with that conflict, and how do you repair and move forward from that conflict? So, Bill, you talked a little bit about how conflict was modeled for you. Steve, did you have model of conflicts and kind of what to do with conflict, or how was it for you?
Not a lot. See, my parents were quieter. They were more the enduring type. I've often had this perception that more from my family, but in this purity culture, 2x2, that a lot of marriages are more endurance as a goal. We lasted 70 years.
Yeah.
But the grumpiest people. All right, I see a lot of, you see some great marriages, but my parents were more that way. They
Okay.
just kind of endured and day to day, and not a lot of arguing, but my father could get really angry and often at me. I was the I was the child that did things my way. I was the number two kid. So a lot of his rage got focused on me because I wasn't quite as conforming as my
Yeah.
three siblings. But they didn't really argue between themselves a lot. You had an occasional raised voice. It was just more absence.
Yeah. So do you guys have thoughts on coming out of purity culture and not having models for how to argue in a healthy way, how to repair from arguments? What are your thoughts on how to learn those skills?
A lot of work. I mean,
Yeah,
it goes right back to learning how to communicate.
mhm,
There's even you can even learn how to argue. There's a
mhm,
there's a thing called meta communication, and it's really communicating about how we're going to communicate. And I talked about that just a little bit with sexuality of,
yeah,
getting uncomfortable and talking about we need to have a conversation about how we talk about this subject. It's
mhm,
okay to even talk about how we argue because in different houses, different childhoods, things have different meanings.
yeah,
Somebody says, I'm fine. As men, we kind of dread that. But I know of one couple that when she says she's fine, she actually means it. And he was taking it the wrong way. It's like, what's wrong? She's like, nothing, I'm fine. So they had a conversation about what that word meant to her, and they found another
mhm,
word to use for that. But going into conflict, it's okay to talk about, learning how to fight fair is a really valuable thing. It's almost like rules for engagement.
yeah,
We all have different communication styles. So if somebody is needs to talk things out all the way through to the end, but the other person needs to separate things through, process internally, and come back to it. There's an inherent conflict in just in stylistically.
right.
And it's okay to say, I want to have this conversation. We need to walk through this, but I need some time to process it so I can give you the real answers. So I can give you
Mhm,
what I'm really need to talk about. Because if I speak right now, you're going to get what I think you want to hear.
right.
And the person that wants to talk everything out needs to understand that, okay, how long do you need? Do you need
Mhm,
20 minutes? Do you need an hour? So you can negotiate how you're going to walk through conflict. And then repair is the same kind of way. It's just talking about what happened, what things meant to each of you. I heard it this way. Now I realize you were actually trying to say that. It's recapping, but in a way
mhm,
that the other one hears what you were trying to say. And
yeah,
you acknowledge hearing what they were trying to get across. Because at the end of the day, conflict is really about not being heard. So even in the middle of conflict, you can stop and say, I'm hearing this. Is that what you're trying to say, or am I missing something?
mhm,
And again, that's curiosity. That
yeah,
softens the emotions of it.
yeah,
So it's okay to have conversations about how you fight.
yeah. That's really good advice. Um, I was reading about validating too, like you were just saying, like validating another person, repeating back what they said to you.
Yeah.
And I realize I'm really bad at that. Like it's not a skill I was modeled or taught. I need to practice it a lot with my husband and with my kids. And I feel like some of it was connected to the church and purity culture for me, I think, because validating inherently, from what I understand, means that you understand and accept what another person thinks and feels without
Hmm.
trying to change it.
Correct. And you don't even have to agree with it.
You
It's
don't
just,
have to agree with
no,
it.
it's understanding and seeing that their point of view is valid
It is valid.
and
And
that
in
they
the
know that.
church, there were, on most topics, there was only one acceptable opinion. So you couldn't validate another person
No.
because it wasn't acceptable to think of their alternative opinion or thought as valid if it
So
wasn't in
you're,
alignment.
so you're taught to judge.
That's where judging comes from. Hmm, interesting.
There can't be another opinion. It's wrong. So you judge.
Wow.
That's one of the things I've struggled with still for 20 some years is judging.
Yeah.
Because if it's not what I know, it's wrong.
Yeah. That's so deeply ingrained for me too.
Yeah.
which the word that comes to my brain right there is narcissism.
Mm,
Always being right, and nobody else is right, or could be right, or could be maybe correct. That's kind of the word that just flashed in my brain.
yeah.
We were just talking about it.
I think they're very closely related, and that's
Mm.
almost a good
Yeah.
euphemism for purity cultures,
Yeah.
narcissism.
Yeah. I mean, it's this whole concept of purity culture is that there's one right way to exist and to be. And to start unlearning that and embody the idea that there's many right ways to be
Yeah,
and to live is very difficult, especially when it comes to things like relationships and sexuality.
yeah,
It's very hard. This kind of segues. I might throw out another question because it's a term that I've run into in my research, and it's sex positivity. So, as we were growing up, we've talked about sex wasn't talked about at all. And I think for me as a kid, and I think for most children, the research, like if something's not talked about, we internalize that as something that's really bad. Like it's so bad, no one can talk about it, which I think developed this with purity culture, this culture of sex negativity. And so I wanted to ask you, Steve, if you had some thoughts around like sex positivity. How do we start shifting that? What is sex positivity?
yeah. I've talked about it in other situations, but I decided, first I was just going to look up the definition, and the definition is like everything that purity culture isn't. It's really what it boils down to. It says it's a framework that views sexuality as a natural, healthy part of being human and supports people having consensual,
Mm,
informed, and self-directed sexual experiences without shame, stigma, or moral
mm.
judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything.
I'll even say, like, even in the healthcare, like when I went into nursing school, like they're like, yes, you have all these parts of a human, including the sexual part, and there is an element of health to that. But even now, it's like it's not. We don't worry about that part of a
Mhm.
person. Like, of course, they're in front of me and they're acutely ill and stuff like that. You need to help with, what might kill them first, and then the sexual part of a person is put on the
Yeah.
back burner. And sometimes, I mean, there's appropriate ways to maybe address it, and you know, but even so, I mean, even in healthcare, sex is on the back. The last thing you worry about in a person, but you don't even know if it's like where it is on the top of their priorities, right
Mhm.
now. If I have somebody coming in that is worried about sexually transmitted infections and they want testing, and it's like this is an opportunity to educate, ask questions, and like you said, give
Mhm.
them informed information. You wonder, it's like, what did you learn? When did you learn it? Who did you learn it by? Did you learn the like proper terminology? Did you learn about how this gets treated? Or
Mhm.
you know um I mean, I worry about that from a healthcare perspective. Goodness, I mean, I've talked about sex more in my career than I have when going to meetings
Kind of
years.
interesting. You talk about it a lot in your career, but it's very difficult to talk about at home.
Yeah, because it's like I'm out in the world and I'm working in the real world, but then I come to meetings, and meetings is this whole separate thing, right? I look at my upbringing and I'm like, you know what? It wasn't, my parents weren't very staunch, weren't very like, we could do sports. Uh, I think my parents saw, benefit in some of that. You're like, yeah, I know the family over here in the going to meetings, they can't do anything. But it's like, maybe they thought it helps us be more well-rounded. It could be that they weren't born and raised into it.
Mhm.
So there's some pretty good aspects I'm thankful for. But yeah, it's like you go, you get your college degree, you're out in the world. And like for some people, that's when they experience the world is when they go off to college and they find out all the other ideas and all that's out there. And then you still have meetings, and then you get a job and you're out in the world working with people, that don't know what meetings is or don't go to meetings. and yet you still come over here on Wednesday night and Sunday and you're this way. It's weird. It's like this, it's a dichotomy
Yeah.
sometimes.
But even the verbiage we were taught speaks to that. We're in the world, but not of the world. And
Mhm.
there's all the separation verbiage that we heard all the time.
Yeah.
It's like you live with a foot in two worlds.
And I think going back to what you said at the very beginning, Steve, you said that you realized you weren't a whole person.
Yeah.
And I think we had to split ourselves
Yeah.
in order to exist in those two places.
Yeah. You're not complete in either one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
then if you blurred a little bit,
Mhm.
how did that make you feel?
Mhm. It was
Shamed?
weird. Yeah.
Well, you could feel good on one hand because you're feeling a little more whole, but on the other hand, you're feeling shame and stepping out of line.
And I don't know how it is for you both now, but as I'm starting to figure out who I am, and again, I'm very much in process as well and a work in progress, but starting to feel more authentic and whole. And then when you step back into a social environment of the church, that is tricky.
It's your first kind of very rude awakening. Step back into that after 2, 3 years, and the energy, the feel, the conversation. It's almost shocking. It's like I always felt like there was a depressed Paul in the room.
Mm. And I feel, and maybe I think it feels this way just because I've been connecting with my authentic self, but I definitely am careful when I go back in that environment, right?
Yeah.
About parts of myself that I show. And I don't know that that's always a bad thing, right? Like you need to be careful and know the right room.
Yeah, we do that at work too, and it's
Yeah.
appropriate. It's what we
Yep.
do. I had a very different Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was at the same house, but it was a little different crowd.
Hmm.
One was mostly family, but not all. One was all those that left, and the other one was a mix. And it was a different time, but they were both fine. They were both nice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, there was just a little different conversation, a little different behavior, a little different energy that you just manage.
Yeah. And I think, that brings up a good point, Steve. Like learning that that's okay to show up
Hmm.
a little bit differently in different groups too. And for me, I think it goes back to that point. Like there's a lot of ways to be. It doesn't have to look just one way.
Yeah, you can be your authentic self and still have the appropriate behavior for the situation. I mean, you think
Hmm.
about work at home, you're still yourself, but you're doing, you're filling a different role.
Yeah. Hmm. I think this one segues nicely. So I wanted to circle back to what you were saying, Steve, about codependency and enmeshment and how purity culture teaches us that you'll find your person who's professing and two will become one, probably a Bible verse. I do not know my Bible super well, but that's probably from a Bible verse. And so this was the idea that we had, my husband and I, going into marriage, that we're going to become one. And I think there were a lot of expectations around what that would look like, what our interests would be, that they must align in a lot of ways, how much of a life outside the relationship each of us would have. I think there were some different expectations from each of our sides as well. So
Sure.
I'm curious for you guys going into your relationships, did that idea play into it? How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I think it's just pretty much the same for most of us going in, that, yeah, two become one. And then if you think about it, you also become one with the church. So the two of you are lost into each other. So there's no self anymore. But the couple is really lost into the church also. You're part of the bigger unit now. So you completely disappear. So who are we as individuals at that point? And then coming out of that, that's the challenge, is how to detangle all of that. I'll let Bill
Yeah.
talk about his experience before we talk about that.
So maybe before, there's two words. There's codependency and
I think you said enmeshment, Steve,
Enmeshment.
yeah.
Can you
Very, very similar.
define?
Good question.
I might have to look up the particular because I use them interchangeably a lot. I usually use codependency.
Okay.
Because codependency, well, let's talk about it. Enmeshment is more like what you see in a high control religion, purity culture, where you are one. You are one unit, you are not separate. Codependency is more you can't function without the other. You have to do everything together. It's the two of you against the world. You're a unit in that way. You don't want to be separate. You want to do all of your activities together. You're not comfortable when the other one has to go on a business trip by
Mm,
themselves. It's that's more codependency. Enmeshment is more, I think it plays out more on the religious side where you are as one.
Okay.
So they're very, very similar.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't say for my wife's and I's relationship, I know that I'm not necessarily codependent. At least I don't think I am. Like you had the example of, if somebody goes on a business trip, the other one is pretty uncomfortable. That's my wife. That's not me. I am like, I'm going to a conference, stuff happens, I get busy, you know, if I don't call you for a couple days, I'm usually busy with stuff, meeting people and things like that. I mean, my wife knows, and we've chatted. It's like I am comfortable being alone. I am that type of person. I would say I'm a introvert in a lot of aspects. Try to be self sufficient, that type of thing. So I'm not sure. Like for me, I wouldn't describe our marriage as codependency. I'm trying to think of how we were in meetings. I don't think we let it become like our whole identity, because there would be some parts in it where it's like, look, raising young kids is difficult. Going to meetings can be even more difficult. She would go to convention and take all three kids, and she would come away sometimes like, why do I even bother? You know how hard it is to keep kids
yeah.
still and quiet for
Oh,
2 hours, 3 times a day?
mm, no.
And then I'm not there because I'm working, so it wouldn't be abnormal for sometimes we would skip meeting. It's like if we just don't feel like we're tired, and like we didn't beat ourselves up about it.
Mm,
It's like it's okay. It's okay to do
hmm.
this. And even as, when, I was an elder, it's like, hey, it's the first weekend, Sunday of the month. It's a union meeting. Let's go do something.
Hmm.
But then again,
Yeah.
sometimes you also plan your vacations
Yeah.
around union meeting.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you could be out of
Right.
town.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think this has changed a lot over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Hmm.
Because my generation was, you didn't miss. You figured it out now. I was one that did more because I didn't care as much, but that wasn't the norm. And where I see a lot more, say, the enmeshment is, and this may be more generational too, so you may have a different experience, the two of you, where you got married, you were with your spouse, you had appropriate couples friends your age, you were all couples friends, and they would have kids a similar age as you. And when you leave, you don't always keep those friends. Those aren't really your friends. That's who you were enmeshed with because
Hmm.
they were in your field, they were had kids your kids' age, and you get along with them fine. Um, but where you see a lot is people don't have individual friends,
Mm,
individual hobbies. Who am I as self? What
yeah.
do I want to do as self? What enriches me that I can bring back to my relationship
Hmm.
and share that? Because when all you have is the together without the self, you're missing a lot of the enrichment of the relationship when you don't have separate pieces to bring back. Like you talk to some people, it's really easy to lose the self in simple ways like what do you want to do? What would
Hmm.
you do if you had 2 days a month that you just did whatever you wanted? You might want to sit down and read books all day with no
Yeah.
bother. But can you?
Hmm.
There's life. What if you want to take a day and go fishing and just completely check out? Or find a friend or two that you go hiking with that's not your spouse. You don't see as much of that, at least I didn't in my era,
Hmm.
in the two by two. it just wasn't really done. You do things as a couple. But I'd be curious to hear your experiences around that.
Go ahead, Mel.
I'll definitely say yes, probably yes, couples our age. Um, and I would say they stem more from my wife's relationships that she's had, and growing up with these other ladies, and then they get married and have kids, and they're still friends. Some
Mhm.
are in, some are out. Some are workers. Um, and still having those. And I wouldn't say I made friends with necessarily on my own with other guys. I would say it's hard. It's a little hard, like coming out of the two by twos is like, well, there was a guy I was going to hang out with, probably don't anymore. And so I have to go back to my worldly friends and cultivate those relationships, which I've been trying to do. I guess, yeah. I mean, it's probably more enmeshment than I'm thinking about. But yeah, where, a lot of your relationships come out of going to meetings, and it's less about having relationships and friends outside of meetings. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
good point, and I can't refute that, and I can't deny that.
Yeah.
And
You guys,
I've seen a lot of, just like you're saying, Bill, of as men, we'll tend to follow the wife's friendships. They're
mhm.
responsible for our spirituality and our friendships and our emotions. There's a term for it called man keeping.
Oh, I haven't heard that one before.
I've just learned it recently, and it's yeah, the keeper of the emotions and all the well-being of the
Yeah.
male.
My husband
But
and I have had a lot of conversations around that as we've both become more aware of those dynamics. And I think in our relationship, definitely, we had couple friends, but it was the women cultivating it.
yes,
So I would get together with the women on my own, but the guys generally did it. Now, I think in our generation, I've seen that shifting, like the guys would do more, but definitely now that we left, we are both having to put a lot of work into cultivating individual friendships. Um, we do some couple socializing, like it's less of that than we were used to. And I think maybe
hmm
now that we're talking about this, I have this expectation in my head that we should be doing more couple socializing, but maybe that's from the church.
that was
That,
my
Mm-hmm.
expectation, but
mm,
that's not necessarily the norm.
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't know how to do that. Like, how do you do friendships outside of your marriage?
yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
and as men, we tend to follow her friendships and just go along with that, and that works fine. Get along with the other lady's husband. Yeah, that's fine. We're
Hmm.
we're easy like that, but
Yeah.
it's not healthy for us. But that's just another way of enmeshment,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
it's
So,
a hard one to break.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. It's uncomfortable. Like, I've got plenty of female friends because I work in healthcare and I'm a nurse. So the vast majority of who I work with are females. But then, we attend a Bible study that's hosted by a couple who has a family, of course. And we're kind of around the people who attend are kind of around the same, age and stage of life. But, I would say within the last couple months, just a couple of us guys are like, hey, you want to meet Friday morning? Or it's something just for us,
Yeah,
just for the guys. And granted, sometimes we're busy and we just can't make it work. But I mean, to me, that's been probably the most helpful
mhm.
is just to cultivate a relationship with other guys. Sure, we attend the same church, but it's nothing, I would say it's nothing like meeting.
yeah,
And I think your point, Steve, is really great because I've been starting to understand it a little bit more too, how when we each become our own selves and kind of have our spheres that we operate in as ourselves, that and then bring those things to the relationship, like that just makes the relationship so much more interesting as
yeah,
well. And somewhere I read this visual, like we each have our, I almost view it as like three different circles or spheres of space. And thinking of this relationship, like the space between us, as something to care for, as
yes,
well as these other spaces, rather than it all being one thing enmeshed
Mm-hmm.
together.
yeah. I have a kind of an analogy like that where
Yeah.
when you come out of a purity culture where you're thrown together to be as one, you kind of build this singular foundation around the two of you that's
Yeah.
rooted in legalism. Um, and you don't really have the self. You're just a pair that's bonded in concrete, with each other. You're one unit now. And your relationship is kind of that same piece. It's in that same foundation. But when you really step back and like separate the self a little bit, and each of you are able to build your own self and your own foundation, then you're able to look out in front of you and build your relationship as like a separate project you work on together instead of being in the middle of it, where if you think of it physically, you start banging elbows and everything annoys you about each other because you're so just together.
Yeah.
But when you have a better sense of self and a foundation of self, you actually could say, hey, let's build our relationship like this. And you can plan it and structure it and build a foundation. I know Julia and Jeremiah were talking about that a little bit, the sound relationship house. And that's the whole piece, the whole crux of it is build that relationship outside of who you are, but have a strong sense of self to build it from together.
Yeah. I think when you do that, it also helps with disagreement because you start understanding that you can disagree with your partner and it's
And you're
okay.
going to.
And you're going to disagree
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
healthy.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you could even have different opinions and views on things and it's okay. They don't have to always align. I think that's a piece of this enmeshment too, is that we came in with the understanding that we would always believe the same things about God and the world and our spiritual beliefs, right? Like it had to align. And if
Yeah, to the
not, then it's
point
like
is how
they're,
uncomfortable that is.
yeah, it's very limiting.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow room for growth.
Right.
Um, we should probably get to wrapping up soon. Do you guys have anything that we didn't really touch on that you wanted to make sure that we hit on about this conversation, about your experiences?
Not really about experiences. I think that feels fairly well covered.
Yeah, Steve, maybe you were talking about generational differences, maybe. Like, and my experience as an elder, I became an elder in my 40s. The people who had one of the meetings was moving out of town. And then, the workers, we had offered like, hey, if there's, anything we can do and help, we had offered like to the workers about a year before. And they vetted me. They're like, well, Bill struggled a little bit, seems there, because like he wasn't attending meetings as often. I was like, that's because I worked every other weekend. Did you come and chat with me about it? No, but okay, I get it. But just like, okay, so being one of the younger elders in the field or in the area, and then when this all kind of came to a head, in March of 2023, it's interesting to see how I reacted versus how the more senior elders reacted.
Hmm.
Like we had elderly folks in our meeting. It's like, do you chat? Did you let them know what just happened? The news that just broke? They're like, why? They're old. They're older. Why
Hmm.
why would you want to disturb their peace?
Right.
And here I am, like joining CCF. I joined CCF when it was still a Google chat. You know, and I helped with a couple of the Zoom chats, too early on, while I was still in. But just to see like a general generational difference of like, do we even come together as elders and talk about it? No, there was like no appetite for that.
Yeah.
And here I'm getting fired up because it's like, I want to do a root cause analysis of why is this happening? And why is it this way? And just like zip.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm like, well, I'm going to be ostracized as an elder. All right.
Yeah. That feels very generational.
Yeah.
I mean, just thinking of, I mean, I know plenty my age and my peers that have left, but there's many of them that are still there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the older they get, the more, and it's generationally older. It's, of course, they're in their 70s, 80s, but it's also that generation because they don't have, I think you're both of the beginning of the generation that has a lot more information available.
Yeah. We're more
Hmm.
comfortable seeking it out, knowing how to
Yeah,
get
even
it.
even in my generation, like the very first book, The Secret Sect,
Hmm.
came out in the early 80s. I was pretty young then.
Yeah.
And you couldn't find a copy of it because workers bought them all and burned them. But um, but
I found one.
information, I've never
Yeah.
seen it. I'd heard about it, and we'd hear little things, but you couldn't go on the internet and learn
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
And it's like raising kids is different now. There's a
Hmm.
lot more information available, and people seek information. I know in my generation, even depression wasn't dealt with. It just wasn't
Hmm.
talked about.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world now. So I think you're seeing that same thing in the just circling the wagons of the older generations. Like we're just not going to talk about it.
Yeah. And they have so many more years for those patterns to become ingrained too, right?
Yeah,
It takes a
I've had
lot of
discussions.
energy.
Yeah, it is. I've had discussions with I had a daughter that left when she was like 18, 20. One
Hmm.
left when she was 30 just a couple years ago. And then I left when I was about 40. And the differences that each of
Mm.
us had in the letting go. My
Yeah.
daughter that left as a young woman, it was like, yeah, I just kind of wandered off.
Yeah.
And for my other daughter, it was more work. And for myself, it was more work. For me, it wasn't a detangling of the church, it was more detangling of the social life. But there's still a lot more work. And the older you are, the harder you have to push to get out.
Yeah. Right. Because more of your life is built
Yeah.
in that system. Hmm.
Yeah, I have one of our kids is like, why do you talk about it so much?
Yeah.
Yeah. My kids did not
Well,
want to hear it when I left.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, why do you guys talking about it so much? Well, it's like, well, this is something that we were born into, that as children, you know, you absorb it all, you notice it all, and now we've had to change our lives in the
Hmm.
last, 2.5 years. And it's
Yeah.
a big change. And there's still things that will come up and we're like, oh my goodness. And then you start talking about it, and or like something will be mentioned in church and you just look at each other like, okay,
Yeah, and my parents left 5 years after I did, so they were in their 60s.
Wow.
So my father had a lot. My mom's a quieter person and things like that, but my dad was a very angry man about it, and he had a lot to say about it. And that went on for 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
But yeah, the older you are, the harder it is. And
Mhm.
to your point of having all the conversations over and over, it's actually kind of cool because that actually builds communication skills.
Yeah. When our kids see that,
Yeah,
I think that's one thing. I know one of our questions, and I think we've kind of covered it a lot, is how to be those healthy models for our families. And I think, like you've been telling us, Steve, like the more we are talking about it, they're going to see that, like, we're going to model how to talk about it for them, whether it's in
yeah.
church or sexuality or relationships.
Kids watch more than listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they see you talking to each other about it, and then you talk to them about it. Whatever it is, they get it.
And I found it's really helpful. It's a helpful way to bring things up organically without being as awkward, like sitting
Yeah,
them down in their room and saying, I need to talk about this. If we're just having a conversation and they're listening from the sidelines, and then they'll like pop in with a question, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. That sideways conversation is really good for kids.
it is, yeah. So before we wrap up, I would like to ask you guys, each of you, if you have any specific resources or advice or encouragement specifically for men that have been helpful for you.
I have a thought of advice, um,
Yeah.
and it comes to relationships, and it's for men and women, but men particularly could use it. If there's one thing you can do that really starts strengthen relationships is appreciate the word appreciate. Using that with our partners at least once a day. something we appreciate about them, it's amazing what that does to build an emotional bank.
Mm,
It's huge. But then I also say for the men, that doesn't mean a physical appreciation.
mm,
That men, we tend to want to go there first, but in reality, what if that's the first appreciation our wife is going to get, that actually is kind of objectifying.
mm.
It's the emotional appreciation, who our partner is as a person. But giving each other appreciation every day verbally, if we don't hear it verbally, it becomes taken for granted. So just doing that every day makes a huge difference in building an emotional bank. And then when there are those little things that come up, it's amazing what an emotional bank does as far as softness.
Mm.
It's like having a soft landing for something.
That's great, Steve. That's really good advice. Hey, Bill, I
Yeah.
see that you're back. If you wanted to share specifically for men, but it could be just for all folks, any specific resources or advice, things that have helped you in this process, deconstructing purity culture.
Yeah, I can't think of anything like specific, just like I think the more I process it, the more I chat with people about it, who is kind of a double-edged sword. If I chat with people about it who don't know meetings, don't know the language, don't know the lingo, just don't understand it, that can be a little frustrating, take a little time. But I've also, they help me understand what's not normal.
Mm,
No, that's not quite how that is. And that's also from like religion and like
mhm,
Christianity as well. But I think talking about it has helped me, not being afraid to seek out therapy.
mhm,
I've done that a couple times, because not only did it, all these changes affect me personally, but also like professionally. Um, and when all those things kind of build upon each other, it's like, family dynamics, your family of origin dynamics, and then work stress, and now religious stress. That adds up.
mhm.
And, I would just say, yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help because you know what? We weren't really encouraged to ask for help, now were we?
Yeah,
And that's something I struggle with too, as a guy asking for help, not only like in my own personal life, but even at work. Like I
yeah,
assume that I need to do it all, and I feel bad, and I get down on myself if I can't. So, asking for help and really trying to take the time to really explore like who I am, explore, yeah, really who I am, and trying to, find out my identity really. What is
mhm,
my identity outside of meetings? What do I like? What do I not like? Who do I like? Who do I not like? What will I tolerate now versus what I won't tolerate? It's, taking the time to figure that out. I don't have like a super like resources. I mean, there's some books like Diane Langberg,
mhm.
her books are good. I think another one's called When Narcissism Comes to Church.
Yeah, that's a good
Like
one.
I read that book and I'm like, how do they know?
Yeah,
How did they know? And it's like they're not even talking about meetings. So like abusive churches and religions is not necessarily unique to us. And there's people have gone through it before us. There'll be people that go through it after us.
yeah. And the same for purity culture. Like that's what's helped me a lot is accessing resources of people that are from other churches that have
Yeah.
helped me to find language and help and understand what happened and how to move forward from it. So it's a really good.
And I would even say like even what helped was, when the news broke, was like, you know what? I'm actually going to go on the internet now and I'm going to look. I'm going to read now. I don't care what you tell me. It's going to disturb my faith. No, no, it actually helped me find out the truth about things that we were coached, counseled, highly discouraged not to look.
Mhm.
Like information is your friend. I mean, you talked about, the secret sect. I found one on Amazon. I spent a couple $100s, but I grabbed one, and that was right before Sherry Crop's,
book,
Okay.
Preserving the
Yeah.
Truth, came out. But I'm like, I'm grabbing it. I don't care. I don't care. It's time. It's time. Like the blinders need to come off. I need to see what's under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate both of you having the courage to talk publicly about these things and being vulnerable about what you've experienced and your own feelings. It's a privilege to chat with you both. So thank you.
Thank
I
you,
appreciate
Shanna.
you hosting this. It's been a great series.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.